Hi, I'm Nick Huntington Klein. This is part of a series of videos on data communication. I talked last time about clutter and focus and how putting too much stuff on a graph can really make it hard to get across the actual thing that we want to talk about. We also talked about some principles of visual perception that will help us focus in on particular parts of graphs. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that last part, and specifically, I'm going to expand on the list of sort of kinds of attributes that things have that make us pay attention to them, right? What kinds of distinctions can we make visually to make people pay attention to one thing more than another? These are going to be called pre-attentive attributes. They're things that really just tap really directly into our visual perception mechanism that help us distinguish one thing from another at a glance, right? And like I said, there's a lot of things that you can tell people. Yeah, okay, if you want to tell one thing from another, you have to do this calculation and you have to pay attention to the shading and the da-da-da-da-da. But, we want it to be easy. We want people to just look at things and immediately already know what we want them to know. That's the real goal of data communication. We don't want them to have to work for it, because if they do, sometimes they're not going to get the idea. And that's sort of us failing at our jobs as data communicators. So let's talk about some basic pre-attentive principles that make it really easy, that we can really easily and immediately latch onto to tell that one thing is different than the others. That's what we're really looking for. What can humans really easily tell apart? Here's some examples. So one thing we can say is that the orientation, if a bunch of stuff is straight and this one is tilted, we're going to pay attention. You can immediately tell that this one is different than the others. Line length, if one thing is shorter than the others, we can tell that apart. Line width, you can sort of tell the thickness of a line. You don't want to get too excited about that one, though, because it really only works once. You can't have a bunch of different gradations of line width and have people tell them apart. Size, one thing is bigger than another. That's very easy to see. Shape, it depends on what kinds of shapes. Some shapes are more similar than others, right? If you had a circle and a square, those are different, but they're kind of similar. So you have to be careful. A lot of this is subjective. How different are these things really? Curvature, a straight line looks different from a curvy line. A curvy line looks different from a straight line. Added marks, right? We can see there, if we add a little mark to one of those, that sort of changes the shape. That's another distinguishing feature. Enclosure is a big one. We talked about that one last time, where, if you set something off, you put it in a box, it's a lot easier to see than everything that's around the box. Color, one thing is different in terms of color or intensity, either in terms of intensity or hue, right? We can change from black to red, that's the hue, and we can tell red apart from black very easily. We can also change the intensity. A deep dark black is different from a gray. A deep dark red is different from a pink. Although for all the color stuff, you want to keep color blindness in mind. We'll talk about color a little bit more in the next video. We also have spatial position. We can tell things apart in space. So we have an example there. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to walk through designing a graph. We're going to design a graph, and we're going to apply some of these pre-attentive principles to make the graph as clear as possible. So let's see what we can do there. All right, so we're not going to be able to use all of those principles, of course, but let's use some of them to see what we can say. So let's say that we have this data right here. And what this data is this is data from the Spanish rail system. And this shows the price of tickets, and specifically their resale prices on different days of the week. So I've taken the average resale price of these tickets by the different ticket types. So you can see we have Adulto Ida, we have Flexible, we have Promo, we have Promo Plus, different types of tickets, and then the different days of the week. And what I noticed in this data is that the resale prices are lower on the weekends. So let's say that's the story that I'm trying to get across. That's the result that I've found in my analysis that I want you, the reader, to know immediately as soon as you see my data communication or my data visualization. So right now what I have is I just sort of have a mess. I got 7 different colors. I've got a bunch of different things. So you have to look all the way down there at the bottom to find the labels for the kinds of tickets that we're talking about. You can see the title that tells you the result, but the graph doesn't really add much onto that. You just sort of have to take my word for it that the weekends are cheaper. So let's start by figuring out how we can clarify this, how we can improve the focus on the result that we want people to see. So first thing we can do is we can use color sparingly. So there were 7 different colors in this past slide. That's a lot. That's a lot for people to take in. And what they have to do if they want to understand these colors, they have to look at this color. They have to match it to the color on the legend, which is hard to do, right? These are different shades. You can tell them apart, but you have to go all the way from over here to over there to figure it out. You have to remember it all the way back. There's just a lot of work to do. We don't want people to have to do that work. It should be done for them. So, I'm trying to focus on the difference between the weekends and the non-weekends. Why don't I just have one color for the weekends and one color for the non-weekends? So that's what I've done. I've turned from 7 different colors, one for each day of the week, to say, I only care about the difference between weekends and non-weekends, so I'm going to have one color for weekends and one color for non-weekends. So I've recolored to just use 2 colors instead of 7. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to choose colors for focus. So you can choose, the colors that you choose in specific. You can use colors to distinguish 2 types of things, but if you want people to focus on a particular thing, the color for that thing should be more eye-popping and eye-catching a color. So what I've done here is I want people to focus on the weekends. So I've made those a big bright red, and I've made the weekdays a sort of more muted blue. So your eyes immediately go to the red there, and you say, oh, look, hey, look at that red. It looks like maybe it's a little bit lower than the blue. Of course, this also looks super ugly with the colors that I've chosen, so we want to make them look good. So what other kinds of colors can we use to make you focus on the weekends? Here I've actually, I've taken the blue that we had for the weekdays, and I've made that my weekend color. And you think, well, wasn't that the non-popping color before? Now it's going to be the popping color. Well, what colors you pay attention to all depends on what else is nearby, right? People are, we think about things relatively. If you walk inside from a hot day, it feels a lot cooler. And if you walk into the same temperature room on a cold day, it feels warmer, right? We all think in relative terms. So here, the blue is very prominent relative to the gray that I've now made the weekdays. Next, how can we improve focus even more on this? So I want to choose intensity. So I can use, let's say I'm talking about how things are cheaper on the weekends. And let's say I'm most interested in the flexible ticket type. Maybe that's different in some way, or it's more prominent. So I can focus on it by making everything else on the image gray, sort of gray it out, changing the intensity of the color there. So this time now you don't just focus on the weekends, you focus on the weekends specifically with the flexible type of ticket. Next, I want people to compare the weekends to the non-weekends. And what I had before is I had the weekends on either side, and you had to compare those to each other, and they're far away. That's hard to do. And then you had to compare them to the weekday in the middle, so it's a little bit difficult. So why don't I just take those 2 weekends and I put them together. Now you can really clearly see how the weekend compares to the non-weekend. It's a little bit easier of a comparison. You can look at this and more immediately tell that the weekends are a little bit lower than the weekdays. Next, I want to declutter. So I have that legend over there on the right. That wasn't very helpful. It told you what the weekend was, but it's far away from the data. So if you increase the distance between these things, it's harder to think of them as being together. So we want that legend information generally to be on the graph. So what I've done is I've just labeled weekday and weekend. In this case, it's pretty obvious. If you know that these are 7 days, and you know there's 7 days in a week and 2 of them are weekends, we might not even need these labels. But it's probably good to have them on there. So I've labeled just once, weekday and weekend. You can figure that out. You look at the graph, you start on the left, probably, and you can see what these 2 things mean. You could, if you prefer, move them over to the very right graph where we're trying to get people to focus there. And also notice that I've moved the flexible data, which I want people to focus on, over to the side. And what that does is it makes it, if I want people to focus on it, it's weird to have it sort of in the middle of everything else, especially if I'm not trying to get people to compare to the other ticket types. So I'm getting rid of that as well. All right, so that is me applying some principles of attributes, some visual attributes that people pay attention to try to bring out the information in a graph a little bit clearer, bring a little bit more focus to what I want people to actually focus on, which is the comparison of the weekday to the weekend for a particular type of ticket. I could go even further, right? So for example, the labels of the types of tickets that are sort of tiny and they're down here at the bottom. It'd probably be better if I could move them up to the top where you're actually looking, right? Where's the actual information here? It's in the height of these bars. So that's where you're going to look, to the height of the bars. So what if the label was also there, right? We've already done it for weekday and weekend. We could do it for Adulto Ita, Promo, Promo Plus, and Flexible as well. We could start marking this up with annotations to make things even clearer. You look here for the height of the bar. Why is the title and the result have to be up here? Why don't I move it over to where you actually see the result? Put the interpretation you're supposed to take away right next to the data that tells you what that interpretation is. So there's always more that you can do with the graph to make it even clearer and better focused. So bring together the information that you want people to focus on. Use principles of visualization to try to set off different kinds of things, which will help people, again, focus on what you want them to focus on. Take the information that you want people to see and put it next to the actual data that shows them that that is what's going on, right? Put the interpretation next to the data, makes things a lot clearer as well. All right, that's it. Thank you.